Hello, everybody. Welcome to our monthly meetup for Australasia Preserves. It's a very special extended edition today. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the land of the Wurundjeri, and pay respect to their elders and families. I'm Jay Weatherburn. I work at the University of Melbourne implementing digital preservation. Also, I've been working with a team recently to develop a research data stewardship program for the university. I am here today to welcome you to this Australasia Preserves monthly meetup. It has been organised in collaboration with the National and State Libraries Australia Digital Preservation Community of Practice. That is quite the mouthful. The Australasia Preserves Digital Preservation Community of Practice began in February 2018 when the digital scholarship team in which I work here at the University of Melbourne organised and ran a half-day inaugural event. Creating and developing this community, it came from a real desire to create opportunities for connection with others already doing digital preservation so that we could improve our work and so that we could share with others what we were up to. Also, we did have a broader goal in that we want to make a contribution to regional growth in connection for digital preservation. So I will talk just very briefly about a little bit more about Australasia Preserves in a moment, but a little bit of housekeeping just before we get started. We do use the hashtag AusPreserves most frequently, so if you're active on social media, please add that to your tweets. We recently developed a website. You can find this at australasiapreserves.org. This is very new. It will grow and evolve over the next wee while as we move forward. Massive thank you to Scholarly Services at the University of Melbourne, who has committed to hosting this website for the next 5 years. And I must say another massive thank you to Matthew Burgess, who put the initiative forward to get a website. I can't believe we hadn't thought of it before, and all of the work that he put in to get it online. We have set up some collaborative notes for this meetup. There's a link there on the slide. We do encourage you to add your thoughts if you're inclined and so able. We have had feedback from the international community that they find these notes really useful, especially because they're in the wrong time zone for attending our meetings. So I do encourage you, if you're able, to contribute your notes and thoughts to those today. The Wi-Fi is there for the people in the room. Hopefully that's working. Cross my fingers that it is. A note about our code of conduct. There is a link there. We do encourage everybody to be very familiar with this. Australasia Preserves, it's a very diverse community made up of people from a very wide range of social, cultural, and professional backgrounds. So we do ask that everybody brings a spirit of respect and friendly inquiry to all of our meetups and our interactions. So this is our agenda for this morning. Please note these times are all in Australian Eastern Daylight Time. We have two fabulous speakers, Micky Lindlar and Melanie Swalwell this morning. What we'll do is we'll have Micky speak for about 40 minutes. We'll have some time for questions and answers. How I'll run that, we will have, I'll take a question from the room here where we are today. And for everybody joining us in webinar land, hello. Please add your questions as we go to the Q&A function. And I'll take a question from the room and a question from the webinar Q&A. And we'll get through as many as we can in the time that we have. So as promised, I wanted to share just a couple of brief things about Australasia Preserves. For those new, or as a reminder to those who've already been involved with us. Firstly, the 2018 highlights document. This kind of showcases all of the things we got up to in 2018. One of the key things that we do and we have done since the beginning is hold these monthly online meetups. These have a range of different speakers, a range of different topics. The aim of them is to share digital preservation experience and knowledge. They're not just online either. We partnered with the State Library of New South Wales in July 2018 the State Library of New South Wales hosted and live streamed and recorded the event. And then again for World Digital Preservation Day in November 2018. In Canberra, IATSIS and ARNet provided the location, the live stream and the hosting. A massive amount of work goes into even just doing an event like this one, like those ones. So I do encourage you to have a look at the highlights. The links to those recordings are there and they're really fantastic events. There's other fun stuff as well in the highlights. If you like cake, we often bake. We have baker extraordinaire in the room, see if you can find her at morning tea. And also, we do have the international song and dance champions in Australasia Preserves of the digital preservation world. I'm not going to call them out and embarrass them today, but see if you can find them at morning tea too. They're in the room. Secondly, I wanted to just quickly tell you about the working group on digital preservation education. This group is currently expanding and further developing a digital preservation carpentry workshop that we trialed at the International Digital Curation Conference in February this year. So we are expanding and developing this stuff into a new concept called Digital Preservation Essentials. This is aiming to eventually be a series of lessons and workshops for hands-on digital preservation skills development. But we are always mindful that we want that tightly coupled with digital preservation principles. So hands-on, but also emphasizing the why behind the tools and the workflow choices that we make. So this work is being recognized internationally. The Digital Preservation Coalition is actively contributing to this material, collaborating with us to develop it. They've also agreed to host the materials when they're developed on their knowledge base. So this way, the international digital preservation community can run their own workshops using the materials to contribute to skills development for digital preservation. We are hoping to have this material finalized later this year. We'll be sharing these openly. Check back to the website. We have a blog, so we're going to try and update the progress of that. Also, I should point out it's not too late to join the work. If you have a passion for digital preservation skills development and you want to get involved with us, please do get in touch. We welcome any and all input. So, in conclusion for me, I can say that there is absolutely no shortage of enthusiasm and volunteer passion going into this community. It has been an absolute pleasure to see it grow so swiftly, to see the need for it, and also to see already how many connections it has provided for digital preservation in our region. So now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the first of two wonderful speakers for this June monthly meetup of Australasia Preserves. Micky Lindlar leads the digital preservation team at the German National Library of Science and Technology. Micky has been serving on the board of directors of the Open Preservation Foundation since 2012, leads the Rosetta Digital Preservation Working Group, and is involved with various other national and international digital preservation working groups and initiatives. Today, Micky will be talking on a decade in digital preservation, a personal, institutional, national, and community view, including thoughts on current and future challenges in digital preservation. Please join me in welcoming Micky.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm actually a long-time lurker on your mailing list. I never get to join your webinars, but we are all watching from afar in amazement what this community does. So I thought that maybe to give you a little bit of a different spin on a presentation and not just talk about what we've been doing at my own institution, I'd do a review of the decade in digital preservation, because this year it's exactly 10 years since I started working in digital preservation myself. So how I'd like to structure this, I'll briefly give you a little bit of background about my institution and about how I view digital preservation, and then do 3 rounds of snapshots. One from 2009, one from 2014, so at a 5-year breaking point, and one of today, 2019. And for each of these snapshots, I highlight what the community perspective was at the time, what was the community up to, what was the national perspective. So in particular here, Germany, to give you an insight of how digital preservation has evolved, or, well, evolved, I think is the right word, in different countries. Give an institutional perspective from TIB, the institution I work for, and my personal perspective as well. And then kind of try to conclude with a glance into the crystal ball with some future challenges, but also future chances. So some background on the German National Library landscape. We're a federal state, so there's 16 states fighting for the same pot of gold. That's what it essentially means. And when it comes to a national library system, we actually have a distributed national research library system. So we have the institutions that sign responsible for the national bibliography, the German National Library that collects all things published in German or about Germany, and a few other libraries that collect special prints and incunablas due to historic reasons. And then for the national need of the research, literature and information supply chain, there are 3 national subject libraries that sign responsible for that, and TIB is one of those. TIB is the National Library of Science and Technology. Alongside, we have 2 partnering libraries, ZEPIMed for Life Sciences and ZEPBW for Economics. And as you may notice, humanities are clearly missing there and some other subject matters. So there's a few university libraries that traditionally have really large collections for specific areas from the humanities and linguistics. And they actually fulfill the need of the research community for those areas. So some background on TIB, we're the National Subject Library for Science and Technology, and also collect or sign responsible for the subject matters architecture, chemistry, computer science, mathematics, and physics. We double function as the University Library of the Leibniz University of Hanover. We were founded in 1959, so we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary actually this month, and currently have an annual budget, including project funding, of around 47 million euro, with a staff size of 536. So we do not, staff-wise and budget-wise, compare to the huge European national libraries, but we're also significantly bigger than the regular university libraries, so we're kind of in between. We currently have a holdings of 9.2 million media units and 209 kilometers of shelves, 67.7 million electronic records, and licensed around almost 57,000 e-journal titles. 60% of those are in national sole possession, so it shows exactly how we have to fulfill that top need of academia for our subject matters. So digital preservation, as I see it, I think throughout the presentation, I'll probably mention the word holistic presentation a couple of times. When I refer to holistic preservation, I mean that it's a digital preservation approach that takes into consideration all layers that exist to a digital object. It's the bit preservation level, so actually keeping the ones and zeros at the most simplest level alive and kicking. Then the logical preservation level, ensuring that you can open and render your file over the course of time. So all that yummy work around file formats. And lastly, semantic preservation to ensure that the content of the object and the sidecar metadata can also be understood over the long term, which is quite a different task than the logical preservation itself. What is missing here is that I always stress that I see digital preservation as an ongoing process. 2 things I can't stand is when digital preservation efforts are stuck in the project stage, where the project gets renewed and renewed and renewed, and the institution never moves to seeing digital preservation as a baseline activity. Digital preservation is not something that you can start once, you give it some funding, and then you can pull all people out and it runs by itself. It's not a black magic box that you chuck information in and it will magically heal thyself and be available in 20 years. Along those lines, I sometimes wonder if we should refrain from calling objects archived, because it kind of implies that it's a finished process. We should probably say that they're in archiving or in an archival state. So let's start 2009. How long ago was that, right? I mean, if we look at this guy and think about the political climate that we have today, it seems like it was more than just a decade ago. So let's see what was going on 10 years ago. From a community perspective, what was going on? Yes, 10 years may feel like a long time ago, but also if we look at our own initiatives and efforts at our own institutions, many of us were not doing digital preservation 10 years ago. Most institutions started after that. But in 2009, Premise was already at version 2. So version 2 was released in 2008. The first version of the data dictionary had actually been released as early as 2005. Portico goes all the way back to 2001, 2002, when it started as a Mellon Foundation study and was already well underway in 2009. We can see some stats here on the right. So they already had 75 participating publishers and already as much as 13.5 million preserved articles, which is quite impressive. The idea behind the logs technology had also been around for 10 years, so that was certainly not something new. Rosetta, the digital preservation system that we use, so it's always significant for us to check where that was at 10 years ago. And when we started looking at digital preservation, it was at version 2.0. So that was the major version that actually introduced preservation functionality in the software. 2009 was also the year of the 6th IPRES conference, so the largest conference around digital preservation. And that year it took place in San Francisco. Had 300 attendees from 4 continents, 22 countries, and 152 institutions. So that clearly shows, I think, that digital preservation already was a hot topic. There was a large international interest and not just one limited to a few countries. And the hot topics that were seeing much coverage at IPRES that year, but also around other venues, was distributed infrastructure. There was a lot of talk about grid, IRODS infrastructure was coming up. People had this idea that digital preservation was something that would first have to be solved on a technological level in a very distributed manner to work. I think that's something that we've moved away from, where a lot of institutions have more solved it in local infrastructures, which do get redundancy and are distributed or redundantly copied to other places. But it's not so much about having one single national infrastructure anywhere that all institutions use within a specific geographic region or a nation. Cost was a huge topic. Everybody thought that it was important. Everybody knew that it was going to be expensive. But as a teaser, up to today, there's no cost model that works perfectly. Also, metadata was a big topic, and moving to business as usual from first project initiatives that existed. So the OPF, as a director of the Open Preservation Foundation, I have a special interest in mentioning that and covering that as well. The OPF did not exist in 2009. 2009 was actually the year of one of the most successful, or probably the most successful European digital preservation project that we saw, which was the Planets project. It was funded in the 6th funding framework of the European Union. Resources as preservation and long-term access through network services. Ran from 2006 through to 2010 and had 16 institutions participating, mainly large national libraries, archives, universities, but also some software companies. Tesella and Microsoft Research are 2 examples for software companies that actually participated in this project. Tesella is the precursor to Preservica. The key outcomes of the Planets project were actually that it gave us a very good preservation planning proof of concept, the Plato framework. It showed everybody that preservation planning was something that could be done and how it can be done. It also gave us an emulation framework proof of concept, improved understanding about file format identification and characterization and how they can be tied to automated workflows. What is great, because this was exactly 10 years ago, there's an old marketing brochure from Planets, so you can look at these predictions that people had about what will happen in 10 years' time. So somebody said that in 10 years' time, 85% of organizations will need to preserve databases. This is a challenge, as relatively little research has been carried out on preserving databases, and they're not simple things to preserve. I don't quite think 85% actually held true, but yes, there are a growing number of institutions dealing with databases. The other thing is that the volumes of digital content organizations will rise 50-fold in the next decade. To us, it was not quite 50-fold. It did increase by quite a bit. So I think it's interesting to revisit these old statements and see how we actually fared against our own predictions. So on a national perspective, this is Angela Merkel, our chancellor. Also a teaser, you'll see her throughout all slides because she's still our chancellor. And she was our chancellor in 2009, so you can kind of see how she migrates through the different decades. So there were a number of funding bodies supporting initiatives around digital preservation at that time within Germany. Nestor is the German Competence Network for Digital Preservation, and it's a competence network that actually started as a top-bottom approach. So it started from being a funded project in 2 rounds to actually start this competence network and get institutions dealing with it. Also, CoOp was started, which is the digital preservation solution at the German National Library. Their initial project was also funded between 2004 and 2007, resulted in a solution that they used using DIAS. I'll get back to that in a second. We have a joint science conference body in Germany, which is represents all the states and the national government as well. And they're in line, or they check the needs of academia and ensure that the information infrastructure organizations fulfill those needs. So they tasked the Leibniz Research Organization, which is a funding body that funds my own institution as well, to lead an effort in formulating a national information infrastructure concept to support the needs of science. It was called the Committee on the Future of Information Infrastructure, KII. So this was started in 2009, and we'll get back to what actually came out of that in 2014. So you kind of just have some points to revisit. And however, despite the funding that went into these few digital preservation efforts and also into the KII paper, the majority of funding still focused on digitization. There was some growing interest and awareness on the political level as well around risks of data loss and challenges of data growth, mainly related to the funding of the Nestor Competence Network, but the main calls still were looking for a digitization project. So Nestor in 2009 moved from the project stage to establish a competence network. There were first publications coming out of Nestor, for example, on perspectives on digital preservation of multimedia objects. The fourth Nestor School took place since 2007. This is something that continues up to today. It's a 4 to 5 day event where you actually, it's kind of like a digital preservation 101 school. It's a very intense crash course covering everything from emulation, file format identification, preservation metadata. It's a great way to meet colleagues from other German-speaking countries. And they try to have them in these remote places so you don't wander away and marvel at beautiful buildings. So really force people to sit down and talk digital preservation for a while. Some of the other good publications that came out of Nestor very early was the Nestor catalog of criteria for trusted digital repositories. The first version of that was actually released during the first project, so 2005, 2006, version 2 in 2008 and 2009. This will essentially lead to the Nestor seal. I'll pick up on that later too. So it's kind of a parallel development to track that was developed at the same point in time to describe criteria for trusted digital repositories. In 2009, Nestor had 7 cooperation partners and 5 working groups. I think we're up to 16 cooperation partners right now and 9 working groups, which is pretty much all the large institutions in Germany and a couple out of Switzerland that deal with digital preservation. On the institutional landscape within Germany, I mentioned CoOp during the funded projects. It's a system used by the German National Library. They've gained first experiences by 2009 using that. It's a software, the software core of that is based on IBM DIAS. This will be important if we fast forward to 2014. In 2009, there was one other institution using IBM DIAS, which was the National Library of the Netherlands, that actually co-developed DIAS with IBM for their eDepot infrastructure. There was also some experience with larger electronic data sets coming out of digitization projects. For example, the Bavarian State Library had been in a cooperation with Google since 2007 for mass digitization projects, which sometimes lead to pretty results like that, as we know, which is also a digital preservation question about reevaluating material. But yes, so there was quite a bit of digital information already available. However, the existing implementations mainly focused on bitstream level and did not prove trustworthy against the Nestor criteria catalog that we defined. Interest in holistic digital preservation initiatives started to pop up, mainly led by the Leibniz organization, so our funding body, who asked my own institution as well as the 2 other national subject libraries to please look into that and have a solution in place for our customers. And the Bavarian State Library also started to have a very active interest in holistic digital preservation. So for my own institution, since Leibniz tasked us to do that, that actually marked the start of the Goportis Preservation Pilot Project. Goportis is the alliance of the 3 German national subject libraries. At the time, my own institution had a digital preservation staff of 1. I was not one of them at that time. I'll get back to that in a second. I actually worked at ZEPI, one of the other institutions. So the idea behind the Goportis Digital Preservation Pilot Project was that the 3 libraries wanted to have one system consortially used, which would allow for a clear institutional separation with collaborative use, clear institutional separation on a data level, but also on a configuration and usage level. So to ensure that in the UI, nobody could see each other's data, everybody would have independent workflows they could configure, and also the data could be clearly taken out of the system, independent from what the other institutions had in the system. We wrote up a catalog with 35 criteria. Some of the key criteria we marked there was that it had to support the needs of 3 institutions with different interests and archiving needs. For example, the institutions would have to be able to make autonomous preservation planning and action decisions. There could not be one that rules them all decision. Every institution would have to maintain full control over their archive data on one site. So we wanted to have a central hosting solution. And the system should also support non-textual materials and have existing library customers, because we wanted a rather fast implementation time. That's actually what the image on the bottom describes too. We talked with our management whether we wanted to buy a commercial system, license a service, or build a homegrown system. And our management was very clear on wanting to have a short implementation time and not take care of ongoing development, which outrules the homegrown part. And the service actually fell short due to the fact that they wanted to have full control over the data on premises. The systems that we compared against the criteria catalog at the time was DuraSpace, IBM DS, the Plans Framework, Rhoda, Portico, Rosetta, and Tesla Safety Deposit Box, which later on became Preserver. So where was I in 2009? 2009 is the year that I started working in digital preservation. Some may have seen this. I did this for, I think, IPROS in Kyoto a few years ago. It's when you talk at a party about what you do, I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but you tell people that you work in digital preservation, either they just walk away, or they have this really odd look in their eyes. So everybody thinks something different. My friends think I just like to play with old computer games because that's what I like to do. My mom might think that I just do the same that I did in my IT life. I sit behind a lot of big monitors. Digiman, I actually encountered Digiman when I started working in digital preservation. If you're not aware of the Digiman videos, go to YouTube and watch it. It's great. You feel like you're saving the world doing what you do. Society thinks that we're just, is that like saving old books? They're kind of different. Our clients think that we do a lot with storage, and the reality is all of the above, plus a lot of metadata, plus tools like Jove, right? So I had worked in corporate IT before that, and so it was a culture shock in 2 ways. One culture shock was moving to public service. The other culture shock was digital preservation. However, I immediately fell in love with digital preservation. To me, it felt like everything I was excited about. I love tech, old and new. I love culture, heritage. I have a humanities background in American literature as well. I love dealing with organizational challenges, and I like figuring things out myself. So it's a lifelong promise for on-the-job learning, essentially. So yeah, it's great. But however, at the same time, I always felt like I was asking really dumb questions. And I always was afraid that I was missing something, that, you know, there must be some information somewhere, or is this really all? So a couple of years ago for World Digital Preservation Day, I wrote a blog post called Divided Time Machine, Letter to Past Digital Preservation, You Be Me. So if you ever feel like you're asking dumb questions, maybe read this and it might help you, kind of help me to reflect on that. It was a very therapeutic process to write that down, I think. Yeah, so that's me in 2019. So let's fast forward to 2014. We can all agree that there's 2 very important things that happened in 2014. The one was that IPRES took place in beautiful Melbourne, and the second one is that Germany won the World Soccer Championship. I think we do not need to know more about 2014. However, for this presentation, I will dive into some details as well. So what was the community doing in 2014? There happened some premise schema updates. 2.1 came out in 2011, 2.2 in 2012, so those were minor updates. A big new development was the first premise OWL ontology was released based on version 2.2. That's great work that has been done by the National Library of France, who use RDF as their serialization form for metadata as opposed to XML. So they're behind this work, and they continue to be until today. That wasn't released, and that was released in 2013. Since 2009, I gave some specs on Portico, but since then, in the past 5 years, Portico, the participating number of libraries almost doubled, whereas their number of e-journal and e-book titles grew by factor 20. I think that's mainly due to the fact that they had very few ebook titles in 2009, and they took on board a lot of them, but it's a very, very impressive growth, and Portico continues to have an impressive growth until today. The first open source digital preservation system was released in a stable release. Archivematica in 1.0 was released in 2014. The Tesla Safety Deposit Box became Preservica in the same year. And IBM Diaz dropped the digital preservation market in 2012. The KB actually decided to develop their own interim system. They're now looking to buy a system or to implement a new solution, but that was the year where they pulled out of IBM Diaz. DMB continues to use it and sort of does so until today. The 11th IPRES in 2014, like I mentioned, was here in beautiful Melbourne and had 200 delegates from 18 countries. The picture below. Hot topics at IPRES then and at the time in general was there was much talk about format registries. If we would need another one than Pronom, I think it's a topic that keeps on popping up. At the same time, there was some other registry work going on as well, mainly coming out of the KEEP project, which was an emulation project also funded by the European Union that tried to develop a hardware registry, which was a great success. The problem with many of these project outcomes is that there's no one who maintains them afterwards. So they kind of go to places where registries die, unfortunately. Yeah. Emulation was a really hot topic, continued to be. Scalable preservation was as well, as people were looking at ingesting more data and asking how their processes scale and how their infrastructure scale and policies. So the OPF actually started at the Open Planets Foundation in 2019 with 9 members, and from 2010 to 2014 that grew to 19. And in 2014, we also renamed ourselves to the Open Preservation Foundation. Open Planets Foundation was the initial name, kind of paying tribute to the Planets project that it came out of. The 9 founding members were people from the original Planets Consortium that felt the need to sustain the momentum that was going on around digital preservation. And I think all the other members today owe a great tribute to those 9 large national libraries who initially kicked off the Open Planets Foundation. So the mission of the Open Planets Foundation in 2014 is that we wanted to ensure that the members around the world are able to meet the digital preservation challenges with a solution that is widely adopted and actively being practiced by national heritage organizations and beyond. OPF started out with a staff of 3 and 2 software pieces that they had under their stewardship, which is Fido and Japalizer. And key activities at that point in time were hackathons. There were a lot of hackathons that were being organized in Europe. I think that also was kind of a remainder of the tradition that was born in the Planets project. Over the course of the next few years, we found out that that's not really feasible if you want to open yourself up to a more international community. There was also a lot of work around format corpuses that we would need to test data. Those are still alive as well and growing. There was project work. The SCAPE project was going on, which was the successor EU project to the Planets project, and a number of webinars were starting to be held. On a national level, you will see the next migrated version of Angela Merkel. There was now fewer support for larger digital preservation initiatives. There were some exceptions, mainly things that the German National Library was doing. It seems like that is for, on the political, especially on the national funding level, the National Library always gets the most attention, I think, which is quite natural because they are the only ones that have a very clear legal deposit right within Germany. So the DP4-LIB project between 2009 and 2012 looked to extend their CoOp infrastructure and open it up to the different clients who use it as a digital preservation as a service infrastructure. The Lookie project looked to kind of have a marriage between CoOp and locks. So actually use the locks functionality for some redundancy backup to the CoOp system. And the EMU project looked to integrate emulated reading room access to CoOp. The KII, National Information Infrastructure concept that I talked about in 2009 as well, had a hosting and digital preservation working group, which I had the joy to sit on. I do not know why hosting and digital preservation are 2 natural topics that go together. In light of the 2 issues being put forth together, there was a natural focus on e-journals and e-books, which was of clear high interest to the science community. The key recommendations were that activities had to be coordinated better nationally, and that we would need to build some form of safety net, taking into consideration legal constraints as well as dependencies on national, European, international institutions. So there was much talk about Portico, locks and clocks infrastructures, how we could reuse that. If you license or if you use Portico, does that mean you still need to save a copy within Germany as well? Can we rely on a service in a different country and so forth? At the same time, we started to really feel that the federal structure in Germany and all the states fighting for the same pot of gold is actually a natural inhibitor to successful cross-regional and cross-sectional digital preservation initiatives and cooperations, which makes top-to-bottom approach for larger projects really, really, really hard. So the institutional landscape, DMB, despite the fact that IBM phased out DIAS, still continues to operate based on the DIAS system. However, they received the full code from IBM, and they've used that code to actually make their own updates on the software. By 2014, there was also a growing number of other digital preservation system implementations with varying extents and functionalities. So we started to license Rosetta by that time, so had a few other German libraries like the Bavarian State Library and the Saxon State and University Library. There are a few German developments as well. There's a DANRW, which is the Digital Archive of the State of North Rhine-Westphalia. They have their own solution, which is completely homegrown, and then there's another one that comes more out of the State Archive of Baden-Württemberg, which is a state in the southeast of Germany. They also developed their own system, which is actually now being sold to some of the smaller state archives. But especially the bottom one has very little preservation functionality. It's more of an archival management system with good bitstream preservation functionality behind it. They're now looking to extend that. DANRW has some ingest functionality where actually some file format identification and characterization takes place. There was a growing interest in trustworthiness. I mentioned that the Nestor criteria catalog had been written rather early. So that was extended into actually a DIN norm, which is the German standardization body. So in 2012, it was released as a DIN norm. It's also available in English. And it now formulates 34 criteria, and it forms the basis for the Nestor seal. There's a European framework for certification where data seal and core trust seal. I don't know if you're familiar with those certification schemes, are the lowest entry level. The Nestor seal is the middle one, and then the full ISO audit against the OIS model and against the 16363 standard is the top level certification that you can receive. From an institutional point of view, we try to move from pilot project to business as usual. The staff had grown from 1 to 4. We had a rather lengthy implementation phase post-pilot from 2012 to 2014. I like to say that that's due to technological, organizational, philosophical, and psychological problems. So absolutely everything. We had some issues negotiating with the software vendor, but also writing contracts with the institutions that will now use it permanently, not just in the pilot phase. We were building a new server room or a new data warehouse center. We had some organizational issues, so there was a bunch of things happening that slowed the process down a bit. There's no single point that you can pin your finger on. However, it's not that we're sitting idle during that time. We actually used that time to getting to know the system really, really, really well. We wrote a rather extensive policy framework that helped us organize our data and organize our work much better in the long run, focused on documentation, and also could start to prepare content for ingest. At the same time, we're doing a short proof of concept for emulation as a service for reading room use together with the University of Freiburg in Germany. That worked really well, but we have some legal constraints in Germany that does not allow us to actually use emulation in reading room environments. So I really envy the US for their fair use that they have. We unfortunately do not have such a nice legislation in Europe. However, I was really happy and really pleased that the poster that we presented at IPRES in 2014 actually won Best Poster Award. So there's some value, some international value or value to the international community around the work that we did as well. Also, it's a time where we started to engage more actively in digital preservation research. We're involved in a EU-funded project, the Dora Art Project. I have a colleague from Germany who makes fun because if I say it in German, say Dora Art, he says it sounds like a Klingonian project. So that ran from 2013 to 2016. The goal was to develop methods and tools for functional long-term preservation of building data, which was 3D point cloud scans and BIM models, architectural data, associated metadata, and associated related work and web data. And we led the digital preservation work package within that project. We benefited from that by building quite a bit of expertise around point cloud scan data and building information modeling processes and file formats. We developed technical metadata schemas for E57 and IFC file formats, also wrote some pronom signatures, built some proof of concepts about extracting that technical metadata and extended our system to support these two formats. If you have any interest in architectural 3D data, what I think is a rather valuable piece of work is this report that came out of the project that we wrote around current state of 3D object digital preservation and gap analysis. Despite the fact that it actually dates back to 2014, it still has a lot of current truth to it, I find. So there's the link to the project webpage where you can also find some sample data for FC files and E57 files and all the project deliverables, as well as the direct link to the E661 report underneath. So Snapshot to me, 2014, am I getting it? Somewhere along the line, my partner and I decided to have kids, and anybody who has kids, has been near kids, or has a good sense of imagination can understand that having kids sometimes can be the greatest thing in the world, and sometimes it makes you want to scream back at the world. And in 2014, I kind of felt like digital preservation was doing the same thing to me as my son is doing right there. People laugh because they say we have the same hair in the picture. No genetic relation, but we have the same hair. It's kind of funny. So I had moved to TIB in 2012 as a technical analyst and a team lead in digital preservation. Like Jay said, I joined the OPF board of directors in 2012, and I started to get really excited about file formats along the way. It's a passion that I've kept alive until today, and also around technical metadata. So I really had a lot of fun with that work in the Dora project, looking at the 3D data from point clouds and building information models. But still, while digital preservation still felt like everything I was excited about, even 5 years into it, I still felt like I understood nothing about it, and I was still asking them questions, and I was still missing some major points. So move on to 2019. Where are we at today? The community, there have again been premise schema updates. Version 3 was released in 2011. There was a conformance statement that was released in 2015. The premise conformance statement is of great value when wanting to understand your implementation. However, it is a conformance statement the same way that there is an OIS conformance statement, since both are not blueprints for an implementation, but describe overlying processes. So it's not something that you can completely benchmark your implementation against. The premise OWL ontology was updated just last year to actually include the version 3 updates, which includes nested IEs and IE versioning, which is a major change in the version 3 data dictionary. The Portico archive content of today has grown to a very, very impressive 1.6 billion files. I think they're recently, or they're just about to finish a large architecture redesign project that they're undergoing due to the massive amount of data that they now store. There's some new commercial products that started to enter the market, like LibSafe by LibNova. It's a Spanish company that popped up a few years ago. Hot topics around digital preservation today, in my opinion, are cloud storage. It's really become a thing that people embrace. It used to be, especially in Europe, frowned upon. In Germany, it still is to some regard, but I think the international community is more reached the state where they think it's absolutely acceptable to, at minimum, have a third copy in the cloud, and in some cases, it's a second copy or even everything in the cloud. The OIS update is upcoming this year, so it has been handed over to the ISO committee. There will be some changes on that regarding representation information, preservation description information. There's some updates to the distributed preservation approach in that. We're now starting as a community to look more and more into in-depth file format problems around PDF, EPUB, but also things like Matryoshka with FFV1 version 3. There was a lot of work being done around AV formats, and in particular FFV1 version 3 by the Performa project. There's a great project series, a great conference series in Europe called No Time to Wait. They also have absolutely fabulous collaborative notes, and they live stream the entire event. It's free to attend as well, but because they live stream it, it's all available on YouTube afterwards. It's something that the international community can really use regardless of your time zone or travel limitations. And also, I think more and more the digital preservation community is starting to look at ethical issues around the data that we collect, about how we give access to it, and so forth. And lastly, I want to say that it's absolutely fabulous. I mentioned that, in my opinion, in Germany, I see that there's a lot of limitations to top-bottom approaches when it comes to digital preservation corporations. It's fabulous to see such great bottom-up communities like Australasia Preserves succeed. So kudos to you all. So where's the community at? This is a map I did a couple of years ago where I just, out of curiosity, looked where IPRES authors were coming from 2004 to 2017. I was kind of asking myself the question, how inclusive are we as a community? something that I was personally interested about, and also if it was a way to see where digital preservation was actually being tackled. So you can kind of see where your own country is at too. You might be happy to see that you're above New Zealand, as I understand correctly. That's a big thing here. But it also shows that there's a lot of white spots of countries that have never presented or submitted anything to IPRES. And there's a number of smaller countries that have done surprisingly few publications, like even bigger European countries. So I think there's work to do around making our own community more inclusive and also more reachable for everyone. And along those lines, I'd just like to briefly point out that there's currently 2 IPRES surveys going on, and I would be very happy if you could all participate. One actually asks about the future of IPRES, and it does not matter if you have ever been to IPRES or if you have not been to IPRES. Even if you haven't been to IPRES, and that's one of the questions on there, you can say that you've visited 0 conferences. You could still mention things that might make the conference more accessible to you, and conference results more accessible to you, even if you're not available or if you're not able to attend the conference yourself. And the second survey that's going on is that of a review of the current IPRES charter, so there's some feedback being collected there. The OPF community. The membership grew to 26 members, and we've actually reformulated our mission a little bit. Over the course of the years, we've taken on a number of new software pieces. The most important one probably being Jove and Vera PDF. They're 2 really large and really important pieces of software in the digital preservation community. The staff has grown to 5, so we felt the need to actually sharpen our mission a little bit. So whereas before it was more focused on member needs, not including open source software so much, it now states that the mission is that enabling shared solutions for effective and efficient digital preservation. The Open Preservation Foundation leads a collaborative effort to create, maintain, and develop the reference set of sustainable open source digital preservation tools and supporting resources. This set of tools, including software and standards, very important that it's not just about open software, but also about open standards, enables organizations to evaluate, validate, document, mitigate risk, and process digital content to be preserved in line with desired policies and community best practice. So the reference toolset, this is actually a map of the reference toolset. It's how we initially, amongst the OPF staff and the board of directors, started communication about developing this reference toolset, and it's now how we used to communicate work around it externally too. We looked at typical processes that go on where you need tool support. So you have a thing like a digital object and a meta thing like metadata that enters your holdings. You want to identify it, validate and characterize it, package, do quality assurance, and eventually put it in a box. And then you want to maybe do periodic rechecks as the tools improve, as you have new Droid signature patterns that are released, as your validators improve. So it's quite natural. It's along the line of the process, digital preservation process that I was talking about, that it's not necessarily something you stick in a black box and it's done, but you need to reevaluate what you have. So we took all the tools that OPF has under active stewardship maintenance, but also tools that came out of projects like Scape. So the CERT SQL database, the CERT is one example for that. Xcore Sound is another one up on derivative check tools, which came out of the Scape project. And the map's supposed to show where in the different kind of steps those tools can help you and which file formats they use. As a teaser, OPF is currently looking at extending Jove. There's a project going on called Jove 2020. There has been a webinar about that, I believe. And it's looking at integrating new modules into Jove and updating the actual framework software behind it. One last word on the OPF maybe. It's currently indeed an organization that mainly has members from Europe and North America. And due to that, offerings like the webinars are in time zones that most likely do not suit the Australasia community. However, that is based on the fact that the members come from there. If we know, and that's me speaking with my shiny OPF hat on, if we know that there's actually a need from your community to have more information from the OPF available, to maybe run some webinars in different time zones, please feel free to mention that to us, and we'll actually do that and see how we can meet your needs too. We're definitely about being open while still having clear member benefits. For the webinars, one good membership benefit is that you have access to the recorded session, all recorded backlog history of webinars. And we've used that a lot for training new staff. There's a bunch of other membership benefits that are listed on the webpage. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact the OPF staff or me at any time. So national politics and institutional landscape. Here she is one last time because she's actually about to become obsolete too. She's not running again. So digital preservation, unfortunately, more or less vanished from the research funding agenda. It has been replaced by much more sexier topics like research data management, open access, science and knowledge. And again, digitization and infrastructure projects where the digital preservation might play a smaller part within. But apparently, unfortunately, on a political level, it is perceived that digital preservation is a solved issue. The National Hosting Initiative, there has been which was a KII follow-up. They did negotiate a national consortium licensing model with Portico, which many institutions in Germany now need, and they're currently working on setting up a private logs network as a next step to have another safety model. More and more institutions are turning away from homegrown systems that are shown in the national institution landscape and actually turning to commercial or commercially supported system, because they've realized that there's no way that they can actually keep on updating the code while monitoring best practice, while still doing their digital preservation work. I think you have to cut your losses somewhere and set your priorities. There's projects like our Emulation as a Service project and the DMB's email project have proven the benefit of emulation very clearly. However, unfortunately, the intellectual property right restrictions within the EU still prohibit implementation of emulation on a larger scale. On an institutional level, we are happily running away with business as usual and certification. We currently have a staff size of 5. Post-implementation, we prioritized our Born Digital holdings, and we currently have comparatively small archive stats, but it's a wide variety of content collections that went in, so around 3 million files and 590,000 intellectual entities with 138 different file formats. So I always wonder when institutions just list the number of their files and the size and terabyte. I always wonder how many file formats they have. To me, as a digital preservationist, that's much more interesting than actually how many you have. So on a certification level, we happily embrace certification because it forces us to build an adequate documentation and to ensure that it's up to date. So it's kind of a self-castigizing process where we keep on beating ourselves up every 1.5 to 2 years, because that's how often we currently intend to recertify. We've certified against the Data Seal of Approval in 2015, against the Nestor Seal in 2017, and have just put in our Core Trust Seal application. So I assume that we will be certified this year. I cannot imagine that process going on for longer than half a year. Also, we've embarked on some projects and new services. We're involved in projects and externally funded projects where digital preservation is a smaller part of a larger project. The Delft project is a large project that we have about digitization in-house of ethnological film, or the film's in-house, the digitization. It's actually done by an external vendor. And the Lindlar project is about a repository for research data from regional studies. Those projects continue to help us gain expertise in new file formats, because we really have a rather limited set of file formats that we deal within the project, and we can really look into it. So Delft really helped us understand Matroshka, FFV1, version 3, and linear PCM better. And Lindlar helped us to test drive new system integrations, for example, an EasyDB integration via the Rosetta OAI PMH interface. And last we started a digital preservation as a service offering a couple of years ago. It's a full service package for small institutions. We do consulting workshop, but then also the full service package where we do the ingest, preservation, planning, and action. So they never actually have to look at the digital preservation system. We talk through the data with them, write submission agreements, and actually write agreements on every preservation action that we take and give regular reporting to them, but they do not have to do any digital preservation work. Currently have 5 customers, and naturally services like that also lead to new system requirements. For example, we need some form of deep deletion where if a service customer leaves the service offering, we might have to prove that we've deleted all the data. So we regularly review our system choice. It's not something that we did once during the pilot project and we'll be happily married to our system ever after. We constantly think about exit scenario out of natural digital preservation responsibility, but also benchmark our solutions against other existing solutions. So on a personal level, here's just some recap of fun with validation over the years. When I started out in 2009, I was like all hardcore saying only well-formed and valid files goes in our archive. And then like a year later, I said, wow, that's a lot of validation errors. What in the world do they mean? And there was not much information readily available. It's gotten a little bit better now. So then I thought about that for a while and worked with validation errors for a while, and I figured out that some of the errors reported are actually not errors according to the standard. So they're more deviations from recommendations in the standards, but not from absolute limitations. So they seem that I arrived at the conclusion that they're not that bad that you would have to fix it, but it's something that you clearly have to flag because it might be a risk. But it's enough to flag it and move it to permanent storage and revisit it if once you know that it becomes a risk. And then I worked more and more because I got really excited about file formats, like I said. So I actually started to build test corpuses that would violate the standard on purpose. I did that in 2016 for an IPRES paper. And I figured out that I could build files that were so broken that you couldn't render them, but the validator claimed that they were well formed and valid. And that leads to a whole other level of realization. So that's me talking today will be that I still love what I do, but however, I still think I'm not getting all of it. So that's the lifelong learning aspect of it. So now briefly, for one last minute, I'm probably already running late, just briefly glancing into the crystal ball, what I see as future challenges. In the short term, one is the misalignment of the research data management and the digital preservation communities. I think we both use the same vocabulary, but we might not have the same definitions for, especially when it comes to things like curating, archiving, ingesting, trustworthiness. However, solid research data management is a prerequisite for digital preservation, and both communities could benefit so much from each other, but often one feels that the other is too hard, and that's a reciprocal understanding, I think. So we run into risks of parallel developments into often different directions, and it's something that we should really, really tackle as a community or as two communities. I think that the Internet of Things hitting the archive will be interesting, especially in case of data relying on embedded systems, which will take emulation to a whole other new level. And also with growing data sets from things like Internet of Things, deaccessioning might become something that we will have to implement as processes, because there will inevitably be processes that allow us to aggregate different data sets into a single one, which would then replace former information pieces without information loss. Further down the road, I think PDF 2.0 is one that's really going to be a stumbling block for us. PDF 2.0 came out a couple of years ago. It's an attempt to fix the limitation of static page layout in PDF. So essentially, it allows for HTML-like rendering, including dynamic content in PDF. We see the first PDF2 files now hitting our archives. It's a complete game changer for PDF, and it's very unclear if implementations actually will stick close enough to the standard to allow for sustainable files. My guess is they won't. My guess looking into the future would also be that inevitably there will have to be something like PDF 3.0 to fix the mess that the PDF 2.0 standard might have introduced, and that then there will be no backwards compatibility to PDF 1x files, which will pose a big problem for a lot of our institutions who have a lot of PDF 1x files. And lastly, the Y2038 problem on Linux, which is a little bit like the Y2K problem. I think it's something that is clearly solvable, but we should start to be aware of it and also ensure that all processes are in place there. And one chance that I see is semantic preservation. It's actually an automatic enrichment with linked data on a curation level to access metadata better, but also to understand semantic drifts within the contents that we preserve. So if you have a document that might have a street name that might have changed over the course of a year, automatic enrichment with linked open data might allow you to keep track of changes to street names, addresses, things like that. So allow for a better direct interpretability of your data. We did a proof of concept, again, within the Dora Art Project on this. So it's not necessarily new research. It's just something that I think will take a very, very long time to be embraced by the community. And if you're interested in that, please visit the website. There's a couple of deliverables on that. So famous last words, right? All swallow that ends well. And if you're interested in further information, here's all our pretty documentation. Everything is available in English with the exception of the Nestor Seal report.